I'd like to give a special shout out to all my patrons, my Wildlings, Night's Watch, and Kingsguard. My Kingsguard include Brendan, Nick, Oscar, Stuart, Josephine, Ikaika, Amanda, RJ, Shad, Nicoletta, Ezra, Jennifer, Jeffrey, Sarah, Pat, Kevin, and Ryan. Thank you all so much. You're the best.
Another reading year is in the books, folks. See what I did there? All right. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to be doing my top 10 favorite books of the year. But before that, we're also going to be doing my year-end awards. I did this last year. It was the first time I had ever done it. I talked about how this is one of my favorite things to do, one of my favorite time of the year, because I love seeing what everyone's been reading. But also, this is kind of one of the reasons why I jumped into the BookTube sphere. And this being the second annual one is pretty cool. I've mixed up the year-end awards a little bit from last year, but I will still be picking my top 10 best or favorite books of the year from my personal reading experience. And it was tough. It was tough to pick these ones, but I feel like one thing I've noticed from this year to last year is that, one, I read way too many long series in a calendar year. I did Dark Tower Realm of the Elderlings, Malazan. I'm almost finished with them in book 8 right now, which is a lot. So hopefully in this coming year I can split it up a little bit more. But the thing I've realized is that my taste is starting to be more refined. I'm starting to understand what really makes me tick as a reader. And because of that, I felt like my top couple books were actually rather easy to pick, because as soon as I read them, I knew that they would land somewhere in the top 5. So I feel pretty good about this list. Some of them, barely made it. Some barely missed. It was tough. I think the bottom of the list, the 10, the 9, the 8, and the 7 were a lot harder to decipher than really my top 3. But with all that said, let's start out with the year-end awards. And the first award that I'll be talking about today is my favorite completed series that I read this year. That means it is done as far as we know. And to no one's surprise, that will be Realm of the Utterlings by Robin Hobb. I think if you've been watching the channel this year, you probably already knew that. But if you didn't, Realm of the Utterlings was supposed to be a piece of my year. I was supposed to read Farseer to get a taste of Robin Hobb. I wasn't sure where she was going to land with me, even though people said I would enjoy her. And it turns out she just absolutely demolished my TBR. I read all 16 Realm of the Utterlings books. I have not read the novellas, by the way, but I will be doing that at a later time or period when I'm missing Hobb, which I'm always missing her, so who knows when that might be. But yes, Realm of the Utterlings not only impressed me, it impacted me. I think that it taught me a lot of lessons as a reader, as a human being, in empathy, dealing with guilt and transgressions laid upon you by people you love. I mean, there's just a lot of value in Realm of the Utterlings, and I've never really read anything like it. But Realm of the Utterlings as a complete body of work, the highs were the highest of almost any reading experience I've had. And I constantly think about Buckkeep. I think about the Rainwilds. I think about Fitz. I think about the Fool. I think about Chade, Burich. I think about everyone, Patience, Kettrikin. I could go on, and each of those characters have like a distinct place in my memory and my heart, my reading heart. And I can't really express how much I value the reading experience that I got from Realm of the Utterlings. Robin Hobb is, in my opinion, probably the best writer in fantasy. That's just my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but for my dollar, I don't know if I trust anyone to tell a story in just such an efficient way than Robin Hobb. And she has such a command over perspective, and being in the first-person perspective, especially with Fitz, was just an experience that I don't know if I'll ever have again for a character. So predictable but true, Realm of the Elderlings is my favorite completed series of the year. But the best ongoing series of the year had some tight competition, but I think I'm going to have to give it to the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. The Shadow of the Gods released this year, starting out a brand new story, which I believe is planned to be a trilogy, and we are going to be getting the second book in Bloodsworn Saga in 2022. It's one of my highest anticipated releases, probably my second most anticipated release, which will be The Hunger of the Gods. Shadow of the Gods just felt fresh, felt good. Gwynne doing Gwynne things, but I thought it was his best opener to any of his other series. He had the sequel trilogy in Banished Lands, and obviously we had Faithful and the Fallen. With those, book ones were good. I was sold, but I felt like Shadow of the Gods was Gwynne doing his best work. So I'm really, really excited, at least for opening a series, I should say, because the conclusions of those other two series are insane. But I'm very, very excited to see where Bloodsworn Saga goes in 2022 and thereafter. And I felt like this just edged out just barely some other series to be the best ongoing series of the year for me. And now here's an award that I didn't do last year, but I'm adding this year because I did a lot more audio this year, and I wanted to talk about my favorite audiobook. And my favorite audiobook is actually multiple books by one narrator in one series, and that is Frank Muller in the Dark Tower series. He only did books, I believe it was 3, 4, or maybe it was 2, 3, 4. I can't remember exactly. They all kind of blend together for me, but Frank Muller is my pick. He's my favorite narrator of all time. Frank Muller brought to life Eddie Dean. He brought to life Roland, all these characters, Susanna, Jake, and will stick with me for the rest of my life in the way that he pronounced things and the way that he capitalized on moments of humor where he could have very much just read the page, but he brought it to life. And King actually even says that in his books when he does a dedication to Frank Miller. Frank Miller passed away, unfortunately, and he was not able to continue narrating the Dark Tower series because of that, which is so unfortunate and very sad. But Frank Miller, the Dark Tower series is something I cherish. It's one of my favorite series of all time now. And I don't know if it would have reached the heights that it reached with me if it hadn't been for Frank Muller. And yeah, hats off to him. Anything he narrated in Dark Tower wins the audio of the year for me. And it's something I look forward to listening to again at a later date. Now let's talk about the award for the most fun read. This isn't necessarily the best book or anything like that, but a book that I stopped thinking about rating and I just started to listen and enjoy, which I try to do with most books. But this book really stood out to me. I did this one audio, and it's a book that my wife recommended that I wanted to read, which was House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Oh my goodness. I just love this book. I thought it was very cozy, very warm, and I laughed. I laughed quite a bit. And I've given this recommendation to some of my patrons. Some of them liked it. I had a couple that didn't, but I feel like people who do enjoy this book end up having just a great time with it. It's good fun. My wife has read it, so it was nice for us to connect over a book like that on the way home for the holiday, listening to it in the car. It was just a joy. This probably isn't a book that anyone would have expected me to love as much as I did. I actually ended up giving it a very high rating, and just personally, I meshed with it a lot, and it was a home run. And I hope to read more by T.J. Klune. Under the Whispering Door is definitely on my list, hopefully for 2022 if I can fit it in. It's pretty short, so I should be able to. But yeah, when you connect with your loved one over a book, it's just something special because we don't always read the same things, but this is one that resonated with both of us. I felt like it had some elements of like darker humor like South Park, not as like maturely themed, but like mixed with Pixar and just some really vivid characters, and it was really, really endearing. And I'm glad that I read it here in 2021. And for the last year-end award that I'm going to be giving out before we jump into the top 10 favorite books of the year is favorite character. Can you guess who it is? It's almost not fair. My favorite character of the year for 2021 is Fitz Chivalry Farseer. Fitz is probably my favorite character ever in fantasy. There's a multitude of characters that I love. I could even include other people from the Realm of the Elderling series, without a doubt. Runner-up for this, though, was Kellis from the Prince of Nothing trilogy. Not a necessarily likable character, but one of the most intriguing, compelling characters I've ever seen on the page. So Kellis would be the runner-up. But Fitz is a clear winner here. It's almost, like I said, it's almost not fair. And the reason why I say it's almost not fair is because we get 9 books from a first-person perspective from one of the best first-person writers, in my opinion, in the genre. And she holds and commands that perspective, and we're in Fitz's head, and it's so consistent. It's so good. I went from everything from frustrated with him to enraged to happy and tears, all those things. So for me, Fitz is the best realized character, the best developed character that I've ever read, and an easy pick for the character of 2021 at the Fantasy Network. And with all that out of the way, let's talk about my top 10 favorite books from 2021, starting with number 10, which was a book that was selected off my random patron wheel, and that was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book is short. It's not overtly complicated. It doesn't have the greatest character work of all time, but it has a mystique and a charm to it, and the mystery that's driving the plot along as you understand how these characters are interacting in this very strange labyrinth. I love journal entries. It's something that I enjoy whenever people use that to tell their story, and we have that here. And I just kind of felt swept away by Piranesi. Like, I told my wife, and I said this in my review, first 80 pages, I was like, I don't know what's going on. She's like, oh, what's that about? I don't know. And once you start piecing the puzzle together, it felt very rewarding. It's something I've thought about a lot of interpretations for people. I kind of talk about that in the spoiler section of my review for Piranesi here on the channel if you want to know my thoughts on that. But talking about Piranesi with other people has been the best experience of reading that book, and the fact that I get to hear other people's interpretations that make a lot of sense to me. So I thought it was thought-provoking. I thought it was a good discussion starter, and I'm really, really glad I read this. I want to read more Susanna Clarke in the future. Number 9 is a book that I think I hailed as a masterpiece here on the channel in my review, and I still stand by that, and that is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is another book that I've been wanting to get to for such a long time, and a lot of the books on this list are like that. But Hyperion, what an amazing book for me personally. I can see why it won awards. I've really never read anything like it. The connection of short stories, and by the way, I'm really starting to realize I like short fiction. I am a big fan of short stories, and I'd like to read more, even if it's just collections or standalones or anything like that. And this book kind of highlighted that because we do have a bunch of different short stories from different perspectives. It goes from like first person into third person. It's just crazy. And at the end of it, it all kind of comes together in a really neat package. and the ending I really enjoyed. I want to read book 2 so bad. I know it's completely different than book 1, but when I think about experiences that I've had in literature, I would say that Hyperion ranks very, very high in the fact that it stands out from a lot of other stuff. And it was written, a little while ago, not terribly long ago, but it was written a while ago. And it's impressive not just for the time period, but also for today. I know some people don't mesh so much with the structure of the book and the way that it's portrayed, but I really did. And it was something that made me want to dive more into Dan Simmons' work. And Hyperion's probably one of the best sci-fi books I've read. And number 8 on the list is another sci-fi book, and it edged out Hyperion just by a smidge, is Dune by Frank Herbert. It's probably on a lot of people's lists this year because so many people read it with the movie coming out. I adored the movie. I thought it was really, really good, part 1. Can't wait for part 2. Definitely had an impact on how much I appreciated the book, I think, but I did read the book prior to going to seeing the movie, and I'm glad I did. I think Hyperion, as a piece of work, I could probably say that it's better in my mind. However, when Dune was published, what it accomplished, what its influence on so many pieces of work that I've read now looking back on, oh, they took that from Dune. Oh, they took that from Dune. Oh, that's a different version of Paul. It's everywhere. And I really loved the story. I thought it was so inventive. And again, if you look at the time period that it was put out in, it was just doing something totally different. I felt very much the same way about Foundation. I loved Foundation. And then I think Dune was an improvement upon that. At least for me. So number 7 is maybe going to surprise some people because people will know how much I love this author. And for this book to be number 7 and not in the top 3 shows just how stacked of a year this was. I mean, it's the best reading year of my life, not just by numbers, but also just quality for myself. And number 7 is The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie, finishing out the Age of Madness trilogy. I thought it was a great punctuation to the Age of Madness trilogy. I thought it was on brand, thought it fit thematically with the trilogy and some of Abercrombie's best work, but I think you can really say that about books 1, 2, and 3, probably because he wrote them all at the same time and then made the splits and released them year after year. Wisdom of Crowds was excellent. I don't know if I could have asked for a better ending. I feel like now that I've sat on a little bit, there's some stuff that I'd love to chat with other people about to kind of figure out what was going on towards the end and why certain things happened the way they did. But Wisdom of Crowds was a blast. It was probably my most anticipated book. It was either that or Shadow of the Gods for this year's releases, and Wisdom of Crowds just excelled in every fashion. And Joe Abercrombie is one of my favorite authors, top 5 favorite author probably for me. So for his book to be number 7 just tells you that this list was razor tight. And before I jump into number 6, I do want to kind of put a caveat. I should have said this before I started the list, but I'm only doing one book per author. That is to diversify this list. If not, it would probably be just a ton of Stephen Erickson and Robin Hobb and Joe Abercrombie, all these things. I wanted to kind of get a good spread of authors that I read this year and different books that I read. So it's only one book per author as we go down, because I know some people are going to say, well, didn't you give this book a 5-star? It just know that caveat does exist in this list. Which brings me to number 6, and that is The Warrior Prophet by R. Scott Baker. A lot of people are going to look at this and say, well, if you're only going to pick one book, why didn't you pick The Thousandfold Thought? It's the third book. The third and second book to me are on equal standing, but what they inspect and what the themes are, I think book 2 resonated with me a little bit more. Book 3 blew my mind with metaphysical stuff. I mean, it's just really, really in-depth and really, really dense, but also in a very digestible way. I think R. Scott Baker is a great writer. But book 2, I feel like book 1 built up so much of this holy war, and then we actually get a lot of the combat in The Warrior Prophet, and I just really, really loved it. If you've watched the channel, you know that I have become a big R. Scott Baker fan. I'd like to continue reading all of his works, and I will. But The Warrior Prophet, to me, is where the series really took off. And in a lot of ways was when I got it, when I totally understood. I knew there was something special going with The Darkness That Comes Before, but The Warrior Prophet capitalized on that and delivered. The Warrior Prophet sits very comfortably at a number 6 in my top 10 favorite books of the year, and maybe on any given day could be a little bit higher. And now we are breaching into the top 5. And this is where I think 5 through 3 were super tight, and my top 2 books of the year have been solidified since I read them, if I'm being honest. So book number 5 is To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. I know it's split in other countries, but for me, it's just the whole thing, To Green Angel Tower, book 3. One of, if not the longest fantasy book printed, I believe. It's well over 500,000 words. And I read this all the way at the beginning of the year, and I thought for sure this was going to be my book of the year. That's how much I love this. And I love Tad Williams. I love Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I love Ostenard. But it's number 5. So everything above this it's a huge impact on my year. But To Green Angel Tower is special to me because when you have a book that's that long and is also ending a very, very epic tale, I mean, in classical terms, classic epic fantasy, feels very Tolkien-esque. That's a tall order. And also to do it in a way that doesn't feel, rehearsed or repetitive, like everything else we've seen in the genre. And I think Tad avoids a lot of that. And Tad is not afraid to get a little bit weird. And To Green Angel Tower has some really inventive ways of wrapping up the story, and I really fell in love with the characters. I always say that I feel like the landscape and the world building is so vivid, maybe more vivid than any other world building I've ever read. If you are feeling like you want to reread Tolkien, I challenge you, if you've not read Memory, Star, and Thorn, go read Tad instead. See what you think. I think it's a very good step from classical fantasy to get to modern, and I can't really speak enough how influential Tad has been in the genre. And now on me as a reader, I'm going to read everything he's ever published. I did read his new novel that he released this year, The Brothers of the Wind. I thought it was good. Not nearly as good as Memory, Song, and Thorn or The War of the Flowers, but very good, and I'm excited to continue on in Ostenard. But To Green Angel Tower is one of my favorite endings of a series of all time, or I should say trilogy, and also just one of my favorite books of all time. Number 4, The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a polarizing book. Some people think it's absolute trash. Some people think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I happen to fall into the latter. I love this book. I've never read anything like it. It is so unique, and it stands out on its own, and it has just, it's rented out space in my head when I think about fantasy, and I think about, oh, okay, Tolkien. I think about George R.R. Martin. I think of people who have done different things or different spins on stuff, and none have resonated with me as much as the uniqueness of The Fifth Season. Now, the Broken Earth trilogy as a whole, I think is good. Books 2 and 3 were good. I really, really enjoyed them. But book 1 just had some magic to it. Again, my wife read it, which was awesome. She read it after me. I said, you got to check this out. And to see her going through it and her experience with it, again, all of these books that I love, I have enjoyed so much conversating about them and having discussion. And The Fifth Season, again, garners a lot of discussion. And she wasn't afraid to take risks. Everyone talks about the second-person POV. I think that's the least important thing about this. If you read it enough, you will see. And another thing that I want to push back on, and one of the reasons why I like Fifth Season so much, is that to be commercially viable right now in the industry, it feels like you have to do third-person perspective. Like people just cross out second-person perspective, third-person omniscient. So when I see someone else step out of that realm and really flex their artistic ability, and they pick the POV that isn't popular or marketable, and then do something really, really cool with it, that's going to earn my respect. And then Jemisin does that, and then on top of wonderful prose, storytelling and themes and characters, just an emotional book that really, really hit home with me. Number 3 is a book that I just finished like last week. And I did not expect this book to be read. Again, this is another one off my random patron wheel. A lot of these are actually off my patron wheel. So it's awesome to be reading stuff that I wasn't expecting to read this year, and then it also being a part of the best list. That's awesome. But number 3 is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I've heard some people say it's portal fantasy. Some people say it's just sci-fi. I don't really care what you label it as. It's a genre bender, and it's Stephen King. I mean, The Dark Tower, that's all it is a genre bending series. And if it hadn't been for 11/22/63, somewhere on this list, probably a little bit further down, would have been Wizard and Glass, because I love that book so much. But 11/22/63 is probably it's my favorite Stephen King book. It is a story that I never wanted to end. It is not your typical King in the fact that I don't necessarily think it's scary. There are some creepier moments, but it just feels so fun to step back into this world and also see some of the bad. I mean, there are certainly things in the past that we've improved on as a society, but to see it through the lens at first of like, oh, isn't this fun? Everything's cheap. Look at this root beer. By the way, I know root beer is a very specific example, but there's a scene where a root beer's filled up and they knock the foam off the top with the wooden paddle. I don't know why. That resonated with me a lot. But then you start to see also some of the downsides of classical society back in the 50s or 60s, late 50s. And yeah, I love time travel. The JFK assassination, that's an interesting topic. And then King understands towns and bodies of people, like literally like people coming together in these small communities, and just the human condition better than any other author I've ever read. And it's more on display than ever before for me in 11/22/63. This was an absolute pleasure. One of my favorite books of all time. Like I can't say it would not possibly be in my top 3 favorite books. Definitely in my top 5. That's how much I love this. I will reread this. The audiobook was fantastic. right before Christmas. I actually went out and bought a gift for my father to read this because that's around the time where he grew up. And he's a big Stephen King fan, and I'm really excited to see what he thinks about it. If you've read 11/22/63, I'd love to hear your opinions down in the comments below. I hope to maybe put out a review for that book in the coming future. It's weird putting it on my list and not having not having reviewed it on the channel, but 11/22/63 blew me away, and it just solidifies the fact that Stephen King's one of my favorite authors of all time. Now, the top 2 favorite reads of 2021. Number 2 is The Bone Hunters by Stephen Erickson. When people talk about Malazan, there's so much conversation to be had. I mean, just based on alone the difficulty of it or the challenge, the structure of it being so much different from anything else really in the genre. I don't know. When I hear Malazan, there's like 1,000 different ways that we could talk about it. But what I want to talk about today is The Bone Hunters and what it achieved on the scale of epicness and of human emotion with some of the best themes that I've ever read in a book right here in The Bone Hunters. The Bone Hunters structurally is interesting because Erickson will even say, he said in the interview here on the channel when I had him on for Chatting with Nuts, he said The Bone Hunters was hard to write because it's 2 books. And it is. You can see that when you read it, but it still, at the end of the day, feels like one complete tale that just has so many climaxes within it. I mean, you have 2 major climaxes, mini climaxes in between, and so much payoff. And some of these characters going through hellacious things. And none of it's for free. You pay for it with emotion. You see the impact and the consequences of actions that happened books and books and books prior. Hell, there's even stuff that's been decisions that were made in the history thousands of years ago that can pay off later in these books. The Bone Hunters is special. I think it's one of the best books I've read this year. Obviously, it's number 2, right? But it is head and shoulders above all of the other Malazan books for me. And Malazan's quickly becoming like a top 5 series, maybe even a top 3 series for me. Maybe just right after Realm of the Elderlings, possibly. We'll have to see how it finishes out. But the Bone Hunters, regardless, even if I never finish the series, the Bone Hunters is going to stick out to me always as the most epic read I've ever had in a story. I would say this is the closest I've felt to the epicness and the pace and the payoff of Storm of Swords, which is my favorite book of all time. This is as close as I've ever gotten to saying, ooh, like it's teetering, like it's tugging on the shoestrings of A Storm of Swords. That's how epic this is. And if you haven't read Malazan, I have a ton of content here on the channel that hopefully could help you out after you finish a book and the discussions. I value those so much. I think everyone that's come on this year and helped me out through my Malazan journey, because it is challenging, but I do feel like I'm becoming a better reader because of it, and really, really pushing my limits as a reader. And The Bone Hunters is the climax of all of that. So my number 1 favorite book of the year, you probably figured it out already. You knew it was going to be Robin Hobb, right? But you didn't know which book it would be, probably. But the book, number 1 book of the year, my favorite Realm of the Elderlings book, is Assassin's Fate, the final book in the Fits in the Fool trilogy. The final book in Realm of the Elderlings, book 16. This is it, like the culmination. And let me tell you what, it is not easy to pick a favorite Realm of the Elderlings book at all. I mean, Fool's Fate, I love that ending. I love all the beats in that story. I like Fool's Errand a ton. Royal Assassin is one of my favorite sequels of all time. But when you have this series, and remember, this is my favorite, so it doesn't have to be yours, but for my favorite and my second favorite series of all time, the amount of hype and pressure to end a series that's 16 books long, all coming together as you've been through life with these characters, that task is so overbearing. Like, I couldn't imagine the pressure she felt writing this. And the thing that I loved, not just about Assassin's Fate, but Fits in the Fool as a total, as that final trilogy, is that she did not just ride on all the success she had. She took a big risk, and if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you'll figure it out when you get there. Took a big risk in Fits in the Fool, and it paid off in dividends. And it was a good move. She executed it very well. But really, Assassin's Fate is probably the only book that I feel, I mean, I've teared up through books. I've definitely shed some tears. There's no qualms about it. That's happened to me a lot. But I was distraught finishing Assassin's Fate. And not just because it was the ending and there was a lot of time invested, but because Robin Hobb as an author had a hold of my soul. And the way that we come through all of these trials and tribulations with these characters, there's so much pride. And a lot of people talk about Realm of the Elderlings like being super sad or depressing and all of these terrible things that happen to Fitz or whatever. But you know what? At the end of the series, surprisingly, I felt a lot of joy. I felt a lot of hope. in Realm of the Elderlings, and specifically in Assassin's Fate. And it felt like a very well-earned ending, and I couldn't imagine it being ended any better than she did with Assassin's Fate. And when we read, we want to connect, right? With not just with the narrative, but with the author and their intentions, but also with other readers. And all of those check boxes were ticked with Assassin's Fate, and it made me feel something. And if a book can make me feel something, it automatically shoots way high up on the list. And this book made me feel every range of emotion. As a character, like I said, I think Fitz is among the best. He's my favorite character of the year, and Assassin's Fate is my favorite book of 2021. We did it. We made it through a whole nother year, folks, and I want to take this time to say Happy New Year. I want to say thank you for the channel growth. My channel, I think, has gained like 4 times the amount of subscribers I had when I did this video last year, and I can't tell you how humbling it is that people take their time out of their day to spend it with me, and I hope that I do a good job of connecting through this screen to let you know that I appreciate you, and I love hearing all of your opinions down in the comments, and I want to see your top 10 list, so get down in the comments and do that. My first episode of Chatting with Nuts for the new year of 2022 will be January 21st. I had some scheduling issues, so I got to push it back a little bit, but January 21st, and then we'll be back to every other week. Chatting with Nuts is one of the coolest things I've done in my life. And the numbers that have turned out for that and the amount of people who have given me positive feedback and constructive criticism has been very encouraging, and I just take a lot of pride in what we do here at the Fantasy Nuttwork. And I say we because you're a part of this. You really are, and you drive the channel. I love the random patron wheel. I appreciate all my patrons, subscribers, and viewers. And yeah, I'm just happy. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to keep reading. So I will have my Need to Read in 2022 video out sometime in the near future, as well as a Christmas book haul, which has some cool Subterranean Press stuff. And, you know, obviously book reviews will be here in Chatting with Nuts. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming in 2022. Hopefully maybe a couple more author interviews as well. I'm working on those. But yeah, thanks for being here. I appreciate you. Hit like if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it. If you love it, hit subscribe. Check out the Patreon down in the description. Optional, but always appreciated. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page.